It's out with the old today, in with the new at the U.S. Capitol, when a new Congress is sworn in, with Republicans now in control of the Senate and House. And Speaker Mike Johnson tells Fox and Friends the deadly terror attack in New Orleans is
an illustration that we live in very serious times. We cannot afford any palace drama here. We have got to get the Congress started.
And what he means by palace drama, the first order of business in the House, before they can consider issues like raising the debt limit and border security and more, they vote today to elect a speaker, and Mike Johnson hopes it's him again.
I'm humbled and honored to have President Trump's endorsement for the role again, as well as the endorsement of leaders across the conservative spectrum and the Republican Party.
But not everyone. Some of his GOP colleagues aren't sure still.
We have a Titanic on the crash course with the iceberg, and our country fiscally is going to have a disaster. And this is a fault of Congress.
That's why Congresswoman Victoria Spartz questions whether Speaker Johnson is right for the job, telling Fox,
I can give him a chance, but I would like to hear from him how he's going to be delivering this agenda and what plan he has, and he hasn't been doing it.
Well, President-elect Trump calls Johnson in his endorsement on Truth Social a good religious man who will do the right thing. Congressman Thomas Massie has already said he's very likely to vote no. One more GOP vote against Speaker Johnson in the House could block his reelection.
To call it a slim majority in the House, Dave, is putting it mildly. It might be the thinnest majority of all time.
Colin Reed is a Republican strategist, co-founder of South and Hill Strategies.
For Speaker Johnson, he's got one of the toughest jobs in Washington because not only does he have to preside over this caucus that has the Democrats nipping at his heels, but also all these various fights in his own party. But he's also he has a long to-do list, as the Republicans everywhere, to get done about the promises they made in the campaign trail last year. And he's got his work cut out for him. Earlier in the week, President-elect Donald Trump threw his full support behind the speaker. That's certainly going to help undo any damage that may have been incurred during the fights over government funding toward the end of last year. But now the work begins anew, new calendar year, long to-do list, and now all the fun starts right now.
You know, you talked about that funding fight that was right before Christmas. President-elect Trump came in and blew up a bipartisan deal. And then the plan that was restructured was rejected by, several dozen House Republicans who went against their president-elect. Is that still an issue for them to deal with? I mean, the Freedom Caucus still doesn't really love Speaker Johnson. Could they try to have some leverage with President-elect Trump and try to find somebody different?
Couple of things I think are at play here right now, Dave. One, Republican voters. Well, first of all, the Republican tent is very large. The coalition that President Trump put together in November and transcended up and down the ticket, it included voters that don't always vote Republican. It included young voters. It included minority voters. It's a coalition that has a lot of different views on a lot of different things. And by nature, that's going to make governing a messy business. And that's okay. That's the virtue of having a large tent and the ability to put together coalitions to get things done. But where I think you're seeing Republicans up and down, doesn't really matter where they came from ideologically, is this just huge and growing concern over the state of our nation's finances and this national debt and deficit that continues to soar with no end in sight, that ballooned to new highs during the Biden administration. And to be fair, it happened during Republican administrations too. But now there's this desire to get serious about cutting the fat. This Department of Government Efficiency led by Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, the reason that you're seeing so much attention and gravity and focus on that is because people want the fat trimmed, they want the belt tightened. You pick the analogy. Now that the power has shifted, that Republicans control all three branches, now is the time to do it, Dave. And they need to do it, and they need to do it quickly, because before you know it, it'll be campaign time again, and we'll be off the focus of governing, we'll be on to the next election. So there's a very small window to get things done, and cutting the fat needs to be atop that list.
What would it mean for Republican momentum if Speaker Johnson isn't elected on the first ballot, and then we have days like we had with Kevin McCarthy 2 years ago?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, we've all seen this movie before. We know how it ends, both with the protracted fight for former Speaker McCarthy to get elected and then the efforts to depose him not that many months later. And I go back to the old rule of politics. You can't replace somebody with no one. Speaker Johnson stepped up. He was the only one who was able to win in October of 2023 when the Republican Party was going through this again. So until and unless somebody emerges with the support of the party, but with President Trump's support, as Speaker Johnson got earlier in the week, that's going to be really hard for that to happen. So as long as he enjoys the president's support, the entire party infrastructure, power, energy, it revolves around the president. And as long as Speaker Johnson has that support from Trump, his job will be relatively safe. But that being said, that margin is not going to get any. It's not going to get any better in terms of his ability to have more wiggle room for the foreseeable future. So he's always going to have just an immensely tightrope to walk.
He's trying really hard to get them to raise the debt ceiling before he takes office, so he doesn't have to deal with that issue anymore. But that has some fiscal conservatives not excited either, because it goes back to that overspending issue.
Yeah. At some point, voters have just had enough of just the endless raising of debt ceilings, more borrowing. They know that this is ultimately going to fall not on this generation, but on future generations. And it's our global competitors who are buying up more and more of our debt, and it's just putting ourselves in a deeper and deeper fiscal hole. So at some point, that's gonna. And by the way, the Democrats, if you talk to them, they have no interest in reining in any of this spending, because that's not what they believe. So when you have two parties, one has to draw a bright line in the sand. The Democrats are certainly not going to do it. So it's got to fall on the Republican Party to do, because at some point you just can't keep spending and spending forever. And look, but that also entails making really hard choices. I think that's why this idea that rather than just coming in there and making promises that you can't keep, this idea that Elon and Vivek Ramaswamy are going to come in there, they're outsiders. They're not from government. They come from the business world. In the business world, you don't have the ability to just borrow and borrow forever. So let's hope they can get serious about it, because not just for the good of the Republican Party, but also the good of our country, that this runaway spending train comes to an end at some point.
You know, that Department of Government Efficiency is actually, it's not really a government agency. What credibility / clout does it have to implement anything? I mean, Congress has to do something, right? The DOGE can't just do something, can it?
Well, that's the $1 million question. And hopefully this idea that they don't necessarily have constitutional authority to implement laws, but they have the ear of the president with the largest bully pulpit probably certainly in modern political history, to go out there and make his case directly to voters. The other thing that I think Republicans need to get really serious about really fast is the Tax Cuts and Job Act of 2017, better known to many as the Trump tax cuts. That was passed along strictly partisan lines in 2017. Democrats were not interested in supporting that, but those tax cuts have worked, and they have helped people across the board. And the bad news, Dave, is they are set to expire at the end of this year. And so come New Year's Day 2026, without action from Congress, every American is facing a tax hike. Congress, as we saw late last year, has this bad habit of kicking important decisions until the last possible moment. If the Republican majority were able to, and maybe they'd even get some Democratic support, because the Democrats are so just out of ideas and just bereft of any sort of vision right now. If the Republican majority in the House and the Senate were able to reauthorize those tax cuts early on, put them on the president's desk, sign them, not only would that be a huge political win, but the business community who is watching, waiting, and hoping that this year's performance is better than last year's in terms of government prioritizing the things it needs to do, that would just be a huge sign of relief. That would spur growth across the board. That would lead to more economic progress, which in turn is one of the other ways. It's not just about cutting fat. It's also about spurring growth. That's one half of that equation, is reauthorizing those tax cuts.
All right, we spoke about Elon Musk. He is at the heart of a spirited debate that has him and Vivek Ramaswamy at odds with conservatives who are hardliners on immigration reform. Musk is a strong advocate of the H-1B visa program that allowed him and many other skilled foreign workers to come to the U.S. Critics say it takes jobs away from Americans. Republican Senator Eric Schmidt says it needs to be reformed, that program, telling Fox,
the broader issue here is mass migration that has undercut jobs, wages, and increased housing costs.
Now, President-elect Trump tried to tamp down the tension that flared up over the weekend, saying he supports the H-1B visa program.
Ultimately, whatever the president says is where the verdict will be, and he's made his point clear. But a couple of things. One, it's much better to be having this debate than some of the debates of the last 4 years of the Biden presidency about soaring inflation, open border, mortgage rates hitting new highs, you name it. So that's a good place to be. And number two, this comes with governing, and there's going to be more hiccups along the way. And ultimately, it's on President Trump to set the tone, tenor, and policy of the party, and people will fall in line behind that. And I think that's what you saw play out over the holidays. There was this dispute with Elon on one side and some of the more other MAGA figures in the other. President Trump came in and he took a position. As long as he keeps to that, that's where the party policy will go.
All right. Lastly, on the Senate side, all the confirmation hearings are looming for the Trump cabinet and Trump appointees. Do you think it could be messy? I mean, the Republicans control the Senate.
This is what's so interesting to me, Dave. Last time 8 years ago at this point in time, President Trump was coming into office, and all these Democratic senators, they were ready to fight and kick and oppose him at every step of the way. We remember some of those battles and some of those key confirmation hearings, whether it was Senator Booker or Senator Elizabeth Warren or Senator Bernie Sanders, all of whom were auditioning to run for president. This time around, you've hardly heard a peep from any of these folks. And the Democratic opposition is so demoralized, is so depressed, is still scratching their heads about what happened a couple of months ago, that they haven't yet begun to figure out how they're going to mount an opposition. And President Trump has just got open field in front of him, and unless he fumbles of his own accord, these picks are going to get through. And I do think that, here's your 2025 prediction for you, that it's very possible that every single one of President Trump's picks gets through, unless somebody finds themselves to be eminently unqualified or has some sort of issue that arises during the vetting. And I know that senators take the advise and consent rules very seriously, as they should. But if these picks are deemed qualified and are deemed and pass their confirmation hearings, it's possible that he gets his entire slate confirmed, which would be so much different than 8 years before.
Well, it's going to be interesting as the next Congress takes over on Friday. Colin Reed, Republican strategist, co-founder of South and Hill Strategies. Great to talk to you. Thanks, Colin.